to the Noddist scholar Peter Gorkin, my favorite pervert. I have to admit I was touched by your letter and your concern for me, which I believe extends beyond my ass. Once you peel back 10 layers of crusty curmudgeon, one finds the remnant of a heart that has always guaranteed a special place for you in my constellation of Canaanites. I do appreciate the warning. I don't know what this is about exactly, but I do have my suspicions. You're right. I haven't been cautious. I've tempted fate by seeking to attain long-held desires, and I've done it at the price of my honor. Apparently, I've also done it at the cost of my safety. If the Sabbat Inquisition is searching for me, then that can only mean their suspicions have some evidence behind them. Or a powerful kindred is pushing accusations to be answered. I have reached out to learn more about this Inquisitor, the maker of chains, and have had very little in way of response. I fear that the rumors about this supposed betrayal have spread far, and some of my old friends have turned from me. It makes me happy to see that you have not. I read with great interest about your Samedi mercenaries, and of course, I appreciate the efforts you are going through to secure them for my protection, but I will not be leaving Prague. If they can be convinced to come to me, they would go a long way in helping me even the odds, but I will not flee. I know what thoughts are bouncing around that thick old head of yours. You almost certainly think that I've lost my mind. And make no mistake, I don't take the idea of being thought of as insane by a Malkavian lightly. But allow me to explain. If I were to flee to Croatia, I would need to get past the Sabbat packs you spoke of, chasing me the entire way. While in pursuit, I would need to evade the eyes of the Order of St. Blaise to make my way to a port in Italy. Even if I managed that, I would then be confronted by the fascist kind under the thumb of the Giovanni clan and their strange wraith minions. If I was able to make it through these trials, I would only need risk the guns of the British Royal Navy or the bombs of the German Luftwaffe, making my way west to Britain or America, where I would blindly roll the dice, encountering the vast power of the Camarilla, monitoring every significant port of entry. Or south, into the heart of Egypt and the grasping fangs of the followers of Set, or I could head east, making my way through the blood-soaked hellscape of the Eastern Front to find refuge among the violent Bruja communist revolutionaries who have as much warmth for a Lasombra lady as the winter on the Russian steppe. But I know Prague. I know its streets and hiding places, I know its people and its rhythms. And even now, I have some friends here who might be able to help me in my attempts to survive. There is no battlefield I can imagine that would be better for me than this one. The Lady Melanthia does not run. You did make one mistake in your thoughtful letter. That they haven't called for a wild hunt is the best thing I have going for me, because despite being stalked so that I might be tortured and slaughtered, I still retain a fundamental right in the Sword of Cain. If I can create the right moment, I will be entitled to challenge my enemy to monomacy. That's where I will have my day in court. That's where I will prove my innocence in the blood-slicked monomacy circle. If I were to defeat this Inquisitor or the Templar thug traveling with him, I'll end this. If I run, this follows me for a century. Despite what many might think, we in the Lasombra aren't perfect. Sure, there's a matter of our lack of reflection in the mirror, but I've always been able to gauge how good I look by the lustful gazes of men like you, Peter. So it hasn't been a great hardship. But what I will say we suffer from, and I will never admit to telling you this, is pride. We Lasombra are a prideful lot. It's hard not to be, as a Lasombra accumulates so many achievements over her lifetime. But there is a danger in pride, to be sure, and I want you to know that this choice of mine does not stem from it. At the end of every evening, a vampire is defined by their reputation. We must lead by example, and those stories are all we have to carry with us through eternity. Perhaps one such story would help you understand me better in this. Have you heard of Lucita de Aragon? I'm almost certain you have. That is a woman with a great deal of pride, and with good reason. She definitely didn't come from humble beginnings. Lucita was born a princess, the daughter of Alfonso II, the King of Aragon. As a mortal woman, she resisted the constraints that her class and position placed upon her, constantly rebelling against the will of her father, the king. Alfonso II's response was to send his daughter to seek guidance from God through weekly confession, which was to have dramatic consequences for the world of Cainites. The archbishop who would hear her confession was Ambrosio Luis Monsada, and far from turn her away from her rebellious path, he would encourage it by embracing her as a vampire. The Lasombra cleric admired her rebellious temperament, to be sure, but more than that, he lusted after her in a way that would put your desires to shame, Peter. But beyond the sexual desires of an old monster, Monsada had a practical reason. When he consulted with the Lasombra clan about the possibility of embracing her, the primary reason he put forward was the power of her station and the value of someone of her noble stature under their thumb. The archbishop would learn the hard way that Lucita was every bit as rebellious in the role of child as she had been as the king's daughter, and resisted him when she could. Though her sense of duty to Clan Lasombra led her to serve as an effective diplomat to other vampiric kingdoms and manipulator of the mortal royal court. Lucita looked for every opportunity to travel abroad to be free of her obligations, and Monsada, due to his infatuation, was willing to oblige. It was on one of her many travels that she met the Malkavian prophet Anatole, who would become one of her greatest friends, one she would share countless adventures with in the darkness of old Europe. During their travels, she would learn much about Cainite history from this Noddist scholar, and even more about faith. Anatole believed that God spoke to him personally and was one of the most pious kindred Lucita would ever meet, which was ironic, considering he was a Diablerist. With this madman at her side, Lucita would come closest to discovering her faith in God and, by default, mankind. But such companionship also comes with expectations. For all of Anatole's abilities and knowledge, he wasn't much of a warrior. It was a role that Lucita would fill with enthusiasm. Seeking out training in all forms of martial skills, excelling most in swordplay, an ability that would come in handy over the centuries to come. This part of Lucita's past mirrors our own, does it not? With you as more of a deviant sex pervert version of honored Anatole. But our long history of learning and travel has endeared you greatly to me. Lucita would meet someone else on her voyages of discovery, someone who would play a role equal to Anatole's in her long life. It would start on the field of battle, where Lucita would find herself in combat with one of the greatest warriors of the Banu Hakim. Fatima, the Hand of Vengeance, was one of the first females embraced into the Assamite clan. They would encounter each other during the Crusades, where under the moon they would fight each other in armed combat for an entire evening, being forced to the safety of a cave to hide from the sun. Over that dangerous day, they would establish a bond of respect for each other's skill. A bond that would endure for centuries after the risk they endured. The two enemies became friends, and eventually they would become lovers. Two of the most beautiful kindred happened to be two of the most lethal warriors in the world of Cainites. When I think of this dynamic between these women, I'm always reminded of my past with Amelia. Our love was born first out of hatred and violence, but evolved into mutual respect and attraction. I yearn for her as I imagine Lucita does Fatima. And I do confess, this has led me to dangerous action. Love makes a kindred do crazy things sometimes. These two friends, Anatole and Fatima, would be crucial to anchoring Lucita to her humanity and keeping her independence. Despite the fact that her sire would take part in the Anarch Revolt, Lucita was one of the minority of Lasombra who refused to join the conflict. When her clan went over to the Anarchs and were said to have diablerized the founder, Lucita declared herself anti-tribu. For Lucita, though it wouldn't be enough to not follow the crowd, she would overcome her reluctance to get involved by helping the early Camarilla assemble a variety of delegates to the Convention of Thorns, using the wide array of contacts she and Anatole had made during their travels, delivering promises of safe conduct to the convention so that the revolt might have a negotiated conclusion. Lucita would actually go on to take the role of Archon in the newly formed Camarilla. In this role, she would join the first Justicars of the Ivory Tower in an assault on the Sabbat near the castle of Vlad Tepes, nearly crushing the heart of the newly formed Sword of Cain. It was only with the betrayal of Dracula, as he styled himself through fiction he would help create, that the Sabbat were spared. It wouldn't be long after this that Lucita would end her association with the Camarilla, preferring the relative simplicity of life as an autarchus. She would travel across Europe exploring the mysteries of the ancient Cainite legend with her friend Anatole, or engage in adventure with her lover Fatima, focusing on discovery and knowledge, rather than the politics of the Sabbat or the Camarilla. I envy her. I wish to share in the freedoms Lucita engages in. Indeed, I feel a kinship with Lucita de Aragon, and like Lucita, I will stand my ground. I decide where I go and with whom I consort. And if that means that I die, then I'll die with the knowledge that I was the mistress of my own fate. They won't chase me out of my city. Like Lucita, I have my pride, and Peter, perhaps in the end, that's all any of us have. Our pride, our reputation, our history. When we stand against the end of all things, when the fires rage and the blood flies, the only thing we leave behind us is the memory of who we were and what we did. I don't begrudge any Cainite who would save their immortal skin by running. But I will stand here, in this place. If I don't survive, remember me fondly as I have always thought of you. You have my permission to let your depraved imagination run wild if I'm dead. I hope such decadence will bring you comfort. Goodbye, Peter. Hopefully only for a little while. You were a good friend. Sometimes better than I deserved. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a war to prepare for. Melanthia, Clan Lasombra, Prague, January 1944.